Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. Since the Agile Manifesto was published in 2001, we have seen an ever-growing number of organizations adopting Agile methodologies. Methodologies like Scrum, Kanban, Extreme Programming, and many others. In particular, Scrum and its many variants like Scrum at Scale or SAFe have been highly successful, and it has become the most popular methodology used, if Agile surveys are to be believed. In this episode, I'm joined by Raj Heda. Raj is helping organizations roll out Agile practices. He's very enthusiastic about the powers and value that they can bring to organizations, but he also emphasizes that care must be taken when rolling it out to your team. Foremost, Raj thinks that adopting Agile methodologies requires a change in our mindset and how we approach software development and delivery. For the rollout to be successful, the entire org needs to buy into it, from senior exec to junior staff member. Some of you may already be familiar with Scrum and other methodologies, but if you're not, don't worry, the metadata and blog post for this episode should have enough pointers for you to follow up on. And here now my conversation with Raj. Hello Raj, and welcome to the show. Raj, could you briefly introduce yourself?
Peter, as I get started, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. In terms of my introduction, I'm an Agile enthusiast and passionate about helping organizations create a better product environment that they can deliver business value, they can improve the quality and flow, and be more engaging and fun. I've been very fortunate to start my Agile journey with IBM in 2001. And then continued with my other journeys at MIT, PwC, BCG, and now with Bain. I'm just inspired with the business value which get delivered by the organizations when they pragmatically apply Agile principles, practices, and values. Happy to be here. Happy to share my experiences with you. Thank you.
And that's a very nice segue, because what I want to start with initially is to drill down in more detail what we actually mean by Agile software development practices. And because there are quite a few around, so people always use that term, we're doing Agile, but what is it actually? Could you give us a high-level introduction of what it is?
So when I think about Agile, it's all about culture and mindset. Based on a set of values and principles, which guides us how we should all work together and how we should engage with our respective customers. It definitely includes Agile practices like Scrum, Kanban, and others, but the broader application of Agile values. What Agile really does is it kind of like breaks down your large, complex problems into smaller modules that can be solved in an incremental, iterative, and adaptive manner. The Agile approaches are first and foremost rooted in lean manufacturing principles. And as we think about the lean, it's all about ensuring that we have a very clear, focused, defined value. We are mapping that to value stream. We are eliminating the waste. We are pulling the work. And we talk about the continuous flow and relentless improvement. The lean approaches were designed to improve quality and throughput, efficiency in a high volume, repeatable widget factory, right? Like your Toyota production system and others. However, Agile emerged to address a more effective new product design and development process. So it's more of like a low volume and high variability design factory.
That's quite a good overview. And I think it's very interesting that you point out it's a question of mindset. My next question really centers around how we got to be so successful with Agile today, in the sense that Agile is now being rolled out by a number of companies. You described your journey from the beginning of 2000. My journey is very similar. So my first Agile project was Extreme Programming in 2000. And at the time, it was very much fringe. It was very much unknown. It was almost like a radical approach. And now it's moved mainstream. So how do you explain that success? Why do you think that companies and organizations are now willing to adopt Agile methodologies?
When I think about your question, I always think about a quote from Navy SEALs who says, "Get comfortable being uncomfortable."
Okay.
Because we are in such an adaptive environment whereby we really rely on feedback from our customers and stakeholders, and that's how we shape whatever we are building, right, in terms of project, product, program. I also love the quote. I was reading or rereading the book Project to Product from Mick Custon. He says that those who master large-scale software delivery will define the economic landscape of the 21st century. And the add-on was that the problem is not with our organizations realizing that they need to transform. The problem is that organizations are using managerial framework and infrastructure models from past revolutions to manage their business in this new one. And right. John Carter adds to that, and he says the world is now changing at a rate at which the basic systems, structures, cultures built over the past century cannot keep up with the demand being placed on them. He's saying that solution is not just to trash the hierarchical structure, what we have created, or the learnings or the understandings we have and start over, but how about introduce or reintroduce a second system, one which would be familiar to most successful entrepreneurs. What business agility is, it requires the technical agility, business level commitment to product and value stream thinking. And it also requires that everyone involved in the delivering process solutions uses this lean and agile practices.
That's where I found in my career in the private sector, where it often fails. People focus on the technical team side. We're doing the stand-ups, we're doing the iterations, but the business actually works in a very different mode. Basically, it works still in the same mode as it used to. How do you actually get businesses to adopt that as well?
I think business sees a very clear value out of this. Where we are today, it's a very highly complex and rapidly changing business world. And as you think of this, right, Peter, it's kind of like we are driving in a very fog, and all we are doing is try to go more faster and faster and faster. What we see is that the pace of work is quickening. The complexity of work is increasing the density of the fog, which is making it more difficult to see ahead. And business is clearly realizing that the agile is a response to this increasingly foggy world. Planning is helpful, but the plans we create quickly becomes irrelevant. However, that doesn't mean that we don't have to have a clarity in goal. How I think about it is that let's provide clarity in direction and allow adaptiveness in execution. And that's the learning from your traditional project management, whereby business understands that, yes, we create this whole Gantt chart for 2 years, 3 years, but within first 2 weeks or 4 weeks, the business has changed.
One of the most popular practices of agile software development has turned out to be Scrum. And I think when I look at surveys today, it is the really dominant aspect of it. What do you think is that Scrum in particular brings to the table that makes it so successful?
So I also like the way, Peter, you put together that Agile is not synonym to Scrum. Agile is a culture and mindset, and Scrum is a framework. However, Scrum is definitely very prominent across the board. And it's a lightweight project management process to make sure that people can address complex adaptive problems, delivering products of the highest possible value. So Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schauber co-authored Scrum, and they founded that on an empirical process control theory, which asserts knowledge comes from experience and make decisions based on what is known today. So the guiding principle for Scrum is let's empower creativity and innovation and build cross-functional teams. And it's very simple and straightforward. It's based on 3 roles, right? So the structure, the roles and responsibilities are very clear in terms of product owner, the Scrum Master, and then your Scrum or Agile team. And it is based on very simple work rules. You have 5 events, which are your sprint planning to make a commitment, your sprint, which is a time box event, your daily Scrum to plan on a daily basis, your sprint reviews to come together as a team and revise what we have built in 1, 2, 3, whatever sprint cycles are, and do a retrospective. So continuously we are learning in terms of people, process, technology, and improving. And you have a very simple 3 deliverables, which are artifacts. You have your product backlog, your sprint backlog, and on a continuous basis, you're creating this releasable, potentially shippable or releasable working increments. Couple of points on the advantage as you speak about is that Scrum facilitates your radical breakthroughs. while retaining the benefits of operating as part of the parent organization. It also delivers the most valuable innovations earlier. It rapidly increases your team happiness because now they see that the user is using their functionality feature, they're giving feedback. And I get excited, right? When, as a developer, when someone uses my features, that's what I want. I don't want the feature to be used after 3 months and they may or may not need it at that point. It builds general management skills. And the best is it creates transparency, visibility, and adaptation within the environment.
That's the theory, and I've seen it in some teams, but still there are some problems because in larger organizations, the feedback loop is often itself quite complex, right? So imagine that you are working in a team that builds a complex software product, and you're one of the many teams that actually put it all together. So you're actually not talking to the customer directly. You're talking to maybe a senior product manager who then talks to another senior product manager who then might be talking to the customer at some stage. And so that feedback loop itself is actually getting a little bit more complicated. So how do you think that in an environment like that, Scrum would help?
However, your product manager or a product owner is a representative or a voice of the customer. Organizations put a lot of emphasis on this role whereby they want them to go to the client on a regular basis or have conversations with the customers so that they can start thinking from their perspectives and bring that learning back to the team and have a growth mindset of saying, okay, what I've learned and what I know from my own experiences is 50%. I want team to be innovative as well. And you also share your feedbacks. So now you are able to build the best product as you get started, and you continuously take feedback from the client by building a minimum viable product, sharing with the client, saying, hey, this is an experimentation, which will take you to the loop, and we will create more minimum lovable features as you start using it. I learned this term just recently, and I was like, wow, it's not that I have to build everything. I'm building minimum viable product, as Eric Ries speaks about, or minimum marketable feature. Hey, use the product, give me feedback, and I will continuously build some lovable feature which you'll use in the future.
I mean, the reason I asked sort of a large organizations is because, I mean, I understand the principle that the product owner is actually kind of the representative of the customer. So you may not be able to talk to the customer directly, but somebody in the food chain in an organization does. But I think there is also, apart from Scrum, there are other frameworks, and you mentioned the name Dean Leffingwell, because I think he came up with the concept of SAFE, which is, I think, an extension of that. And I think that is particularly aimed at larger organizations. Could you talk a little bit about that framework?
SAFE is a scaled agile framework. And the purpose of SAFE is to ensure that the organizations, as they learn applying Scrum practices or Scrum, Kanban, XP practices at the team level, how they can scale up at the program or product level to the portfolio layer. What Dean speaks about is that every business, what we have is a software business now. If you have to achieve that state of business agility, that means that the entire organization, not just the development, should be engaged in continually and proactively delivering innovative business solutions faster than your competition. So that means business agility requires technical agility and a business level commitment to product and value stream thinking. Also requires that everyone involved in delivering business solutions uses lean and agile practices. SAFE has gone through its own journey of learning. And this is for lean enterprises. And it's based on knowledge base of proven, integrated principles, practices, and competencies so that the organizations can achieve their business agility by implementing lean, agile, and DevOps at scale.
So how does it actually do it then? We already talked about Scrum and that it's actually basic components. They're not that complicated. So you have your artifacts and you have your routines. So how does this tie in with SAFE?
Scrum is based on your clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities. You need some sort of structure or events and processes. And then you have artifacts. As you move on to the next level of program where you have multiple projects, delivering common values. Again, you need clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities. So, for example, for one team, you have a product owner. If you have multiple teams within the environment, you need a product manager who is aligning or visioning the overall product. Same way you have a Scrum Master, you also need a facilitator at the program level so that they can coordinate dependencies and the releases of the product, which SAFe calls them as release train engineer. And then you need a system architect or an engineer who ensures that they're thinking not from the team perspective, but from the overall program or product perspective. They call that big room planning as the PI planning session. You have your system demos on a regular basis, and then a retrospective or inspect and adapt at the end of the cycle.
It could be then sort of imagined like at one level you have the individual Scrum teams, and then you have the kind of Scrum teams, a daisy chain the levels up so that they all work in this kind of same understanding of having cycles. Is that the correct understanding then?
It's absolutely correct, right? As you have done PI planning, now you have a strategy, but you always want to revisit the strategy on a regular basis to make sure that we are aligned, we are not getting new information whereby we have to deviate. Because it's really based on the outcome theory. It's based on the long-term thinking. It's based on creating a cross-functional dedicated team of teams. So one is, as you said, strategically, you have your product owner sync on a regular basis. And tactically, you want your Scrum Master to sync so that they know the progress of each other teams. They know if there are any dependencies or any obstacles or impediments.
Now that we have a number of teams and organizations and companies rolling out agile software development practices in different shapes and forms, how can we actually measure the success of their implementation and the rollout? How do we know that it works, and how do we know that it works well?
Very good question. I always ensure, right, that in any of my agile transformation cases, we always have to make sure that we lay out a very clear KPIs, key performance indicators, as we get started.
Okay.
Again, I've seen people do different thought processes. The one I use is, hey, let's define your business KPIs, why we are building what we are building, and what will be the outcome from the business perspective. You build an agile KPIs in terms of plan versus actual stories per iteration, budget versus actual cost, cycle time, defects to production, and all of that. Your client KPIs, which are very important in terms of your customer and user satisfaction. Personally, I feel the most important one is your employee KPIs, your team morale or their happiness within the environment. I just want to say one more thing. Organizations do that, and then there are organizations who on a regular basis conduct surveys, right? You have your Business Agility Institute, your version 1 report, many institutes who does that, and God bless them for doing it because it says, hey, are we seeing the same thing across the board? They take the input from thousands of agile practitioners across the globe, and the report very clearly speaks about that, hey, organizations have learned or they're becoming better in terms of managing their changing priorities, the visibility, the business and IT alignment, the delivery speed and time to market, the productivity, the team morale. As you have a very clear KPIs on set and you measure regularly all of the problems or obstacles or impediments you see within the software development life cycle, you start seeing that it's paying back, right? Because you're applying the principles and practices.
It's interesting that you actually mentioned quite a number of different categories because there is data-driven development and data-driven improvement. I think we're all big on that, or a lot of people are. What I take from you is that when we look at these key performance indicators or these results indicators, that it's very important that we actually focus not just on one area, but we also focus on others. So we look at how the employee is doing, how the agile practices themselves are doing, what are the key business or organization performance indicators. Because the definition of all of these can actually be quite difficult to find these parameters. Exactly. And is that also your experience? That how much time do you spend in actually defining these parameters in your practice?
It depends on the maturity of the organization. Some organizations do it continuously at the portfolio layer, but they may or may not be aligning with the product level or the product roadmap. We make sure that they are kind of creating some sort of one-to-one or one-to-many mapping. And as the product is getting built, They are tracking it to make sure that whatever we thought about, the outcome will be, are we seeing it or not? If not, it's experimentations, deviate. And I think that's one of the virtue of Agile, because of the visibility and transparency, that you're able to catch it up earlier in the cycle. You don't have to spend 6 months and say, geez, this product is not going to work. You see that earlier in the cycle and says, you know what, it's okay. There's a sunk cost, but I think, you know what, I got a better idea of how can I satisfy my customer needs here. Let me deviate and build this product.
That's quite an important point. I think that people sometimes, including myself, forget, which is that whatever practices you put in place, whether it's Scrum or whatever it is, the power of it is really recognizing that nothing is really set in stone. So whatever you do today doesn't have to be what you do in future.
And Peter, just to add there, right, in the traditional project management, we create a path that will go from A to B, and we stay so focused with that project plan. If we deviate a little bit from that plan to actually start speaking about the variance and the status report, and we go into an area of managing the project plan rather than thinking about the needs and wants of your customer.
As you quite rightly said right from the onset, it is really a change in mindset, because there is a tendency that we actually follow this sequential path. What we're introducing with Agile is, and that's probably important to point out repeatedly, is that you have several points in the entire process where you can change things. The adaptability is built in.
And the most important thing, Pete, on your point, just to extend, is the value proposition. Again, if you apply waterfall principles in a predictive environment, it works. However, if you take a piece of work, if you're building an adaptive product and you apply those practices, they don't work. And the reason being is that you want to deliver things faster to your client so that you can take continuous feedback from them. In waterfall thought processes, you do work breakdown structure, you decompose your complex product into small components, and you take top to bottom up approach, and you build anything and everything what comes there. And the business says build everything, and build everything yesterday.
Yes.
However, in Agile also, right, we do journey mapping, we do story mapping, we decompose all our features into stories. However, we put them into 3 main buckets: your must have, your nice to have, and your won't have. Constantly speak with your customer and says, you need to prioritize, because I will always be limited with my resources or constraints by them. You tell me which will give you the most value, right? To make sure that I build 80% of the product in 20% of the time, and rest of the 20%, which will take 80% of the time, is not important. It's not critical. Let's move on and build something else.
In other words, sort of the product backlog is not really so much a plan, but a living document where the priorities and in fact, the content can change and is expected to change.
Exactly.
I would like to move on to another question. Benefiting from your vast experience there, what are the 3 top things you should be doing when you roll out Agile in your team and organizations?
First thing I always think about, have perspectives for your organization and your team members, and have empathy for them. Be human, right? Be human. This comes from Simon Sinek, right? Empathy and perspectives. Team of teams have been trained to do their day-to-day job in a specific way. And now you're asking them to change the course of work, what they have learned in their life. But we do know that in these situations, we do need to change to survive in this market condition. And the first thing in this 8-step process John Carter speaks about is creating a sense of urgency, so that we know that we need to help others see the need for change through a bold, aspirational opportunity statement that will communicate the importance of acting immediately. With that, build a guiding coalition around it, whereby you get this coalition of effective people or champions so that they can guide, coordinate, and communicate its activities. With that, create a very clear strategic vision and initiatives. We can clarify what our current state is and what the future state will look like, and how can we as a team can make that as reality. The 4th one, he speaks about enlisting a volunteer army. As John Carter speaks about, right? You cannot just drop everything and then just recreate everything. Organizations, as they are large scale, we want to make sure that there are massive number of people who rally around this common opportunity. They must be bought in. and they should see the urgency to drive the change, and they all move in the same direction. The fifth one he speaks about is enabling action by removing barriers. Very important, right? We have people, process, technology structures which are there from decades or maybe centuries, and now you're trying to move them.
Right.
And the role of the leader and managers is to see how can he or she removes the obstacles and impediments within the environment by giving their support. Sixth one, I think, speaks about generating small wins. They should be recognized, collected, and communicated as early and often so that we can track the progress. The seventh one speaks about sustaining the acceleration, whereby we want to make sure that as we get our taste of our first success, we increase the credibility so that we can improve the systems, the structures, and the policies, and then institute the change, which is the eighth one, so that we can articulate the connections between the new behaviors and making sure that they continue until they become strong enough to replace old habits.
Yeah, well, that's quite a detailed plan there. But sometimes things don't quite accordingly go to plan, as we all know, in large organizations or in small, in fact. Turning it upside down, so what are the three pitfalls that you've seen when people actually roll out this kind of change management and introduce agile processes and tools in their organizations? Where did they fail? Where did they go wrong?
So again, there's a long list of things. However, the top three, my top three would be, or top four would be that first and foremost is to ensure that our top leadership is committed to participate, support, and sponsor this effort. It's not only the organization team members who needs to learn a new ways of working or adapt to this new culture, your leaders also needs to. The second one, as I'm thinking in my mind, would be value. Do what matters within the organization. And that is one thing we should be all care about. And every time we do something, from your top leadership to your middle layer management to your team members, a developers or QA or a business process or a functional member, the question they should always ask is why? What is the purpose? And once we define it, then it's easy to achieve it. The third one is this lean agile approach, what we are talking, cannot be just implemented by itself. And who does that is people. And creating a culture where we have respect for people and culture is the basic human need. People should be empowered so that they evolve their practices, they improve, they innovate. And management ensures they challenge so that there is more creativity within the environment.
There's the respect, then there's the question of, do we actually add value by taking a particular measure? And when I read through various different agile surveys, one of the failures that you mentioned actually as the first one is that the top leadership of the organization has kind of bought in, but not really. People are basically just, trying to meddle their way through it.
Sometimes it becomes like a lip service or another initiative they have to see because their competitors are doing it or their peers are doing it. But you know what? I'm not coming to any sessions to learn what even Agile, Scrum, Kanban means and how this will be applied and what will be my role.
Yeah, and respect for people, I think, is likewise crucially important, because when we think about artifacts in Scrum, such as burn down charts and estimation, some of the feedback that I got from the ground in various different teams that I worked in was that it could also be used as a micromanaging tool. You probably come into these questions, and how would you deal with that, where this is actually being used to beat people up rather than to inspire them to do better?
I think that's what we need to get away from. When you have respect for people and culture, you know that you have recruited and hired the right rock star who are deep understanding or who have the right attitude. The leaders have to make sure that they are aligned with the vision and they give them autonomy. And initially there may be some hand-holding or guardrails put together so that mutually both the parties are building trust within each other. But the objective at the end of the day is to create more empowered teams who are self-organized and self-directed.
Indeed. I'd like to finish by asking you whether you can give people who may not be quite so familiar with it some pointers where they might go to find out more about it.
That's such a heavy loaded question because there are so many experts right now in the field and the work, what they're doing is remarkable. Definitely, I have my favorites who I read their blogs and everything. How I started was I went to the cohort who created the Agile principles and who are still very active in the Agile community and started reading their blogs. That would be the step number one, right? Jeff Sutherland, Ken Schaber. Then Scaling Agile also have their authors, Dean Leffingwell from SAFe, or you take Jeff Sutherland from Scrum at Scale, or you take Craig from Less. Brilliant thought processes so that you are constantly learning what they are seeing in the market, what they have built, why they have built it, and how can you pragmatically apply those principles and practices based on the situations you are seeing at your client side or within your organization. And I also love what Business Agility Institute is doing on a regular basis, publishing cases. That's another really good place where I take a lot of inspiration from. And then there are quite a few reports which get published by surveys. So then you're learning that the problems you're seeing, you're not alone. Organizations are applying solutions which you can also try. Again, they're all based on the core 12 principles from Agile. Think through those, solving those problems, applying those principles.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Raj. All the best for the future.
Thank you so much, Peter. I so greatly appreciate. Thank you, everyone who is listening. And if you have any thoughts, feedback, please reach out. I'm on my own learning journey and would love to learn from you more.